The examination hall buzzed with the soft hum of neural translators as 300 of Earth's brightest minds attempted to decode the Zephyrian linguistic matrix. Holographic symbols danced in the air before each candidate, their meaning as elusive as smoke to most human comprehension. Alexander Chen stared at the floating glyphs with the same expression he'd worn throughout his childhood, when teachers asked him to explain his consistently mediocre grades. The symbols meant nothing to him. Absolutely nothing. While other candidates frantically scribbled notes and manipulated their neural interfaces, Alexander simply sat there, watching the countdown timer tick toward 0. Time remaining. 60 seconds, announced the Zephyrian proctor, its crystalline voice echoing through the vast chamber. The alien's 4 eyes swept across the room, cataloging the humans' desperate attempts to prove their species worthy of joining the Galactic Confederation. Nora Williams, seated 3 rows ahead, glanced back at Alexander with concern. She'd been his study partner for months, watching him struggle with even basic Zephyrian phonetics while she excelled at every linguistic challenge thrown at them. Her test screen already glowed green with completion, her score undoubtedly in the 95th percentile. 10 seconds, the proctor announced.
Alexander looked down at his blank test screen, then at his hands.
Calloused from years of archaeological digs, scarred from carefully brushing ancient pottery shards, they told the story of someone more comfortable with the dead past than the living future. He thought of his grandfather's stories, whispered in a language that had died with the last native speaker 50 years ago. Time. The screens froze. Alexander showed a perfect 0, not a single correct answer among the 300 complex questions. Around him, other candidates slumped in their chairs, most scoring barely above 20%. Only 12 humans had managed to pass the minimum threshold of 75%. Nora was among them, naturally. The Zephyrian proctor's expression remained unreadable, its translucent features betraying nothing as it processed the results. The human species demonstrates insufficient linguistic capability for Confederation membership, it declared. However, protocol requires individual assessment of the top performers. The failed candidates began filing out, their dreams of representing humanity among the stars crushed. Alexander remained seated, forgotten in the exodus of disappointment. He watched as the 12 successful candidates, including Nora, were escorted to a secondary chamber where they would undergo final evaluation. What happened next would be debated in xenological circles for decades. The Zephyrian facility's defensive systems, shield generators that could withstand the combined firepower of a dozen warships, began to fluctuate. Not fail exactly, but resonate with something unexpected. The proctor's 4 eyes widened as energy readings spiked across every monitoring station. Alexander had begun to speak, so quietly that the facility's sensors barely registered his voice. But the words he spoke were not Zephyrian, nor any language in the Confederation's vast database. They were older, carrying the weight of lost generations and forgotten wisdom. His grandfather had been the last speaker of Taushiro, an Amazonian language declared extinct in 2008. But extinction, Alexander had learned during long nights by his grandfather's bedside, was not the same as death. Languages could sleep, waiting for the right moment, the right voice to wake again. The Zephyrian proctor staggered as if struck. Its crystalline form began to shift, colors cascading across its surface in patterns that seemed impossible. What is this? It gasped in perfect, unaccented English, something no Zephyrian had ever achieved. Alexander continued speaking, his voice growing stronger. The ancient words flowed like water over stones, each syllable carrying meanings that transcended mere communication. Taushiro had been more than language. It had been a way of seeing, of understanding the connections between all living things. The facility's shields didn't just fluctuate now, they sang. Harmonic frequencies that had been mere engineering specifications transformed into something approaching music. Other Zephyrians throughout the station stopped their work, drawn by sounds that seemed to bypass their auditory organs entirely and speak directly to their consciousness. In the secondary chamber, Nora watched in amazement as the supposedly inferior human linguistics suddenly made sense to her Zephyrian evaluators. The 12 successful candidates found themselves understanding not just Zephyrian grammar, but the emotional undertones and cultural contexts that had seemed impossible to grasp during months of study. "The bridge," whispered the proctor, its voice filled with something approaching reverence. This human has found the bridge. Alexander finally fell silent, exhausted by the effort of channeling something he'd thought was lost forever. The facility's system stabilized, but something fundamental had changed. Where there had been barriers between human and alien understanding, now there were pathways. The proctor approached Alexander slowly, its crystalline form still shimmering with residual harmonics. "You scored 0 on our examination," it said, its voice now carrying inflections that made its words feel warm, alive. "Yet you have accomplished something we believed impossible. You have spoken the first language." "First language?" Alexander asked, his throat raw from the ancient words. "The theoretical parent tongue from which all sapient communication evolved. We have searched for traces of it across 1,000 worlds and 10,000 species. And you—" The proctor's 4 eyes focused on him with new understanding. "You carry it within your dying languages, don't you? The fragments we've lost." In the days that followed, everything changed. The Confederation didn't just accept humanity, they sought them out, eager to learn from a species that had somehow preserved echoes of the universe's first words in their most endangered tongues. Alexander found himself at the center of a linguistic revolution, working with teams of xenoarchaeologists to map the hidden connections between Earth's dying languages and the fundamental structures of consciousness itself. Nora stood beside him on the observation deck of humanity's first interstellar research vessel, watching alien suns paint the cosmos in colors that had no names in any living language. "Still can't believe you failed that test," she said, smiling. Alexander touched the recording device at his throat, now filled with dozens of extinct human languages he'd spent months learning from their final speakers' descendants. Sometimes failing forward is the only way to succeed. Below them, the universe stretched out in all its incomprehensible vastness, waiting for the words that would help sapient beings understand each other across the infinite dark. And somewhere in that darkness, ancient voices whispered in languages that had never truly died, only slept, waiting for their moment to wake the cosmos itself. The dead tongues had indeed shattered shields, not through force but through the simple revolutionary act of connection across the void of misunderstanding that had separated species for eons. In failing to speak the future, Alexander had given voice to the past, and in doing so had opened doorways to possibilities no one had imagined. Humanity's greatest strength, it turned out, wasn't their ability to adapt to alien ways, but their stubborn refusal to let anything, even languages, truly die.